in a certain format, but they want the right amount of spaces between lines. They don't want trailing white spaces. The typical cosmetic stuff. That's really important. So let's go ahead and install our PyLint. And when we do, it's going to start complaining about our Python script because it can't see some of the modules, and that's okay. So don't worry if the linter brings to light some errors in the script. That is what we want it to do. So in this case, I've got one error in this script, and I can see on my right hand side that you see that little red mark. Here is that issue. So this is the value that you get from the linter, in that it gives you alerts and you can hover over it. This one says that it's unable to import my my API module, and that's okay. Believe it or not, this is an expected result for me. Okay, so let's talk again about what we're here for. It's not for me setting up a new computer. It is for us to build Ansible modules for Juniper Mist. And what I've done is I've broken this task into two main functions. One is I have a list of modules. These are the Ansible modules that you would use to provision the Juniper devices through Mist. And each module has its own function. So Mist Site allows you to edit the site, the concept of a site inside of Mist. Mist Wired allows you to make configuration changes to the wired devices. These are the EX switches. WLAN, do you need me to explain it? I mean, it's for your wireless LAN. And Site Groups allows you to manage this concept of groups, which is very, very helpful, especially when you start getting into configuration templates and site templates and such. So this module will allow you to create and remove site groups from there. And my documentation is wrong. You can tell that I do a lot of copy paste. I should have. Okay, so anyway, two concepts for us to focus on. One is the modules. These are, again, the Python code that performs the function of what we're trying to do. And then we have a utility file. I called it api.py. You could call it pineapple upside down cake.py, as long as there weren't semantics wrong with the file naming. Anyway, so I call it api.py. This is a module that we're going to import inside of all of these modules. Let me just use the right words. This is a package that we're going to install into we're going to import into all of our modules. And it's going to handle all the REST API work, right? So we're working in this concept with Mist where we've got a REST API that sits in front of all of our networking devices. Switches, firewalls, access points, etc. And Mist exposes a REST API. So all the automation that we're going to be doing is going to be talking to that API. And so because of that, it makes sense, at least to my brain, to take that API functionality or working with that API and put it in a centralized place. And so all of our modules, they just import that and then they can do their own functions within there. Now, within that, it's just worth pointing out that I've got a couple things that look a little bit weird. I am creating a custom object inside of Python called the response object. Don't get too tripped up on this. Basically what I'm saying is I'm creating a new object type and it's going to focus on the conversion of the text into JSON. That's all you really need to know. It does separate out as well. That's it. Just focus on that. That's the only thing. And we'll be using that response object within our API calls. But the real hero of this story is this Mist helper class. This is the one that's actually doing the API communication work. And you can see inside of this section right here, what we're doing is we're setting up some parameters within this Mist helper class. We're telling it where the base URL is for the Mist API. We're setting a timeout value. We are setting the API token value. We'll get to kind of what some of these other things on the right hand side of this means just in a little bit. And we're also setting up the headers. So anytime you import this Mist helper module, it's automatically going to come, equipped with all these basic parameters already set up into that object. And so here's just a quick health check to make sure that the API token is valid. It's going to take this API token and then it's going to make an API call to the Mist API, and it's going to say whether or not you get a 401. If you get a 401 error message back from the API, that tells you that your API token is invalid, and that will stop all the work from the module right then and there. Obviously, if you've got an invalid token, you've got some other issues that you need to work on. Okay. Today we are brought to you by the Perrier strawberry flavor. Okay. In addition to just setting up some basic parameters of this class, this Mist helper class, we also have a URL builder. And the idea behind this, it's not a function that's exposed really to the user. It's just to account for whether or not somebody included a /. Ampersand, come here. So it's just trying to account for whether or not somebody has passed. Sorry, my dog's diaper. I think it's full. Let me go take them out. We'll be back. Sorry, fam. Hey guys, come on. Let's go. Let's go outside. Harley. Come on, Harley. Harley, let's go outside. Come on, love. Okay. Come up here. Good job. Good job, bud. All right. Here we are back. All right, so what are we talking about? The URL builder. Yeah, the whole deal is to just account for whether or not there's a / in the path. And if it does, it trims it out. That's the only thing that this is doing. Here's another one. This is actually doing the send of the API call. So this takes in the URL. This takes in the data. If there is data, like if we passed in a Python dictionary, this will JSONify. This will convert that Python dictionary into JSON, store it as an object called data, and then make the API call, and then restore both the response as well as information from using the fetch URL. So this fetch URL is kind of an interesting module that I'm starting to get a little bit more familiar with. In past world, I would just import the request library and work from there. But it looks like Ansible is now providing this utility for you. And it's kind of nice because it breaks apart the response that you get from an API from the information of that API. What was the status code? So it kind of segregates those. Pretty nice to work with. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Here's our 4 main HTTP methods. Our get, our post, our put, and delete. And those are all listed right here. So what you'll see us do in the modules, we'll import this Mist helper, and then we'll reference like a .get operation or a .put operation or post or delete. Based on what it is that we're accomplishing or we're trying to accomplish, we will call that method by its name. And so you'll see that within our modules. The only other thing that I really want to point out is that the other function of this module utility is to define what we call the argument spec of the Ansible module. And this basically is when you have an Ansible module, you have some parameters that you expect the user to fill in. Doesn't matter if you're on Cisco or Juniper or what device is out there. The idea is you're using an Ansible module, you want to pass it some kind of parameters. So if I had a module out there that only changed the host name of a router, that's still a parameter where we expect the user to say what they want the host name to look like. What do you want it to be set to? And within that, you have to define, okay, are they passing a string? Are they passing an integer? Are they passing a list? What is it? You gotta be very declarative as to what that object type is. And so that's what we're doing inside of the argument spec. I like to keep the argument spec outside of the actual module itself. And it's just because I want my module pretty light and easy to understand. And so what I do is I write the argument spec for that module, again, declaring what parameters are acceptable within the module and how to interpret those parameters that are passed by the user. I store that here in the utility script because it's, in my mind, it's a nice, concise way to store all of them. In addition to that, what I commonly find is I copy and paste, even myself, quite a bit. So having this type of functionality in a centralized place allows me to reference maybe an argument spec I did for something different. This is the argument spec for the Mist site. And as you can see, this was going to return a dictionary. Here is the dictionary. By the way, this is what Ansible is expecting. That's kind of why we set it up in the way that we did. The function doesn't take any parameters, and it just returns a dictionary. And the dictionary, these are the things that the user had filled in. So here's an object called address. This would be like for a physical address, street address. And we can see that it is not required, and the type is a string. For the API token, this is kind of an interesting one. They're required to set to true, so the user has to pass an API token. But if they didn't pass it in the module itself, we've accounted for that. And we're saying that maybe the user has passed it as an environmental, meaning that it's in their bash file, or it's just within their Linux operating system as an environmental. We're saying if they didn't pass it in the module, fall back and look into the Linux operating system or the host operating system and look for an environmental set to either Mist API key or Mist API token. If either of those is found, take the value of that variable and that will be used as your API token. And obviously for API tokens, that's pretty sensitive information, so we set the no log equals true. That means if we're working in a large environment or we're just working in a team with like 3 or 4 people, we don't want our API token logged to the text file, to the text log. So we say no log equals true. That's also a type of string. Then we get some more complex objects. Lat long. This is for this will actually be a dictionary where the user will be expected to pass in the latitude parameter and the longitude parameter, and you can see that both of those parameters are the type of a float. So again, the whole idea behind the argument spec is to declare what parameters should be passed into the module, which ones are required, which ones are not, and also how you're telling Ansible how to interpret the data that's entered by that user. Really, really important. This one's a lot easier. The site group, there's not really a whole lot of things required for this API call. Again, the token, the org ID, the state, you know what? That should actually be a little bit different as well. Then you get into the more complex ones. Think about all the things that might be required for a switch configuration. And you can start to see why the switch config would start to get a little bit big. And this isn't even the whole shebang. The wireless LAN. Holy cow. Do you guys understand how many options are available for you in the wireless LAN world? There's a ton. And so what I did when I built all this out, I went to, there's a public, I just love returning to memes. There is a public Postman repo is not the right word, collection. Juniper Mist. Let's see if we can't find that one. Yeah, that's not it. There is a Postman collection out there. Might be this one. Let's look here. Okay. It looks like this is it. And yeah. So there's let's open this up just a little bit. Let the web page breathe. Okay, there we go. So for the WLAN, what I did is I looked into the sites and then I looked into WLANs. And I said, well, what is available and what's required for you to create a new site-based WLAN? And I almost regretted it immediately because, holy cow, there is a ton of options that are available for you. And what I had to do is I had to take all these parameters that are available through the REST API and convert them into parameters for the Ansible module. In addition to the site level WLAN, there's also like configuration template WLANs and organization based WLANs. Suffice to say, it took forever, but that was what was required in order to do that. Okay, so our argument specs are all built out. So the Mist helper is a killer function or class that allows us to import all of the important heavy lifting into all of our Ansible modules. And you'll see, here on this line, actually the one that shows as an error, this is where we import that utility module, or specifically the Mist helper class that we were just looking at. Now we're inside the module, and we're pulling in that class. We're pulling in all that functionality that we just declared, including all the argument specs. We're pulling that into this specific module. Now it doesn't like my Python linter here doesn't like the way that I'm importing this, because it doesn't think that this is a valid a way of showcasing it, and so it's reporting an error. Don't be alarmed, that's okay. Now let's give a quick example. Let's look at, yeah, that's fine. Let's just look at the site module. Let's just stay here. We've got the instantiator. This will instantiate the script for us, this common thing. I can't remember exactly why this is the way that it is, but it is the way that it is. Then we have a main function here, right? And so the main function, again, I try to put a ton of documentation here. Not really just for you, but mostly for me, because I'm going to forget. Here we're actually, this is the main kebab, right? This is, obviously, as you see here, this is the function that gets ran whenever this script is called. What we do is here's that Mist helper function. We're importing the argument spec for a site. Now this right here, Mist site spec, we just saw that right here, Mist site spec. So we're importing all these this argument spec into our script, and then we're setting it equal to an object called argument underscore spec. Now we invoke the Ansible module, which we imported right up here. And then inside of there, we pass a parameter of argument spec, and we set it equal to the object that we just created there. So argument underscore spec happens to be what Ansible is expecting, or that's what the parameter is for this Ansible module, helper class, or whatever we want to call this. Long story short, we're importing all the parameters and the argument spec that was passed, and then we're storing it as a module, or an object called module. All right. Now that's important, because what we do with that module is then we try to run that module through the core function. Right. So the main functions, there's not a whole lot going on. Right. We're importing the argument spec. We're importing or creating an instantiation of the Ansible module, and we set that to a object called module, and then we pass that, all that stuff that we just did, we pass it through another function called core. And this is consistent across all of our devices here. All right, now let's look at that core module. This is where the heavy lifting is actually executed. So this is kind of an interesting thing. What we're doing is we're creating new objects based on the value that was passed through the Ansible module. In this case, we look to see what the user had set the value for the object of name. And we're then taking that and we're creating a new object that we can just call name. We're looking at the organization ID. We create it as a new object called the org ID. Then we also create a new object here called rest, and we set it equal to, and this is where we reference that Mist helper functionality, and then we pass in that module. This is what we had created in that main function right there. So once we have all of that set, we've laid out the groundworks to make our API calls, because we're referencing the Mist helper as this REST object right here. And then you can see us do the things that we were talking about. This was an HTTP GET operation. We have others that might be an HTTP. Here's a delete operation. And then we've got another down here. This is a post creation. So this is if we're going to create. But note, all we need to do, since we created this REST object right up here, is we just reference REST dot and then the name of the method. The name of the method, if you recall, came back right here. Here's the get, here's the put, post, delete. And then, so yeah, this is how we're going to be interfacing with the API. So there's a lot of like groundwork that's laid out. And this is just mostly for my sanity. I like to modularize, if that's a real word, all the functionality that we're trying to do, and then we can just import each module based on the task that we're trying to accomplish. In this case, we're trying to get a list of all the sites within my organization, and my trackpad's dying. There we go. And then we look again to validate that data that comes back. Is this, did we get a HTTP status code of 200? If we did not, then let's go ahead and fail the module. Then we set some data based on that response, etc. So this will actually do the heavy lifting of our module. This will interface with the API. This will store data from the API, and then we can introduce some logic at that point going forward. Basically what I'm doing in this case, whenever we use the Mist site module, what I want to make sure is if the user had passed the name of a site, I want to make sure that that site, I want to know whether or not that site exists already. If it already does exist, then the next step going forward is determined. So let's just say I'm using this Mist site function. Actually, I got some examples here. Let's pull that up. Mist site. There we go. So in this case, I'm using this Mist site functionality. It came from this module right here, and I'm passing in the name of it as the site name is Katie. Now, does Katie already exist? Because if it does, that's going to affect which kind of HTTP method I'm going to use. Another thing that's going to affect it is the value of state. If state is set to present, that means we want this to exist. Come here, Sam. Come here. All right. So, again, really, really important to understand whether or not it already exists. So, let's move back over here. So the first thing that we need to do is make an API call to Mist to say, give me a list of all the sites that you already have. Now the problem with this, or I guess the challenge in this, is that what we're going to get back is a series of site IDs as well as the names, etc. So what we need to do is we need to take all the data that we got from the API when we make this request for all the sites. We need to store it as an object, and then we need to look into that object to say, hey, is there a site with the name of Katie within the system already? If there is, then we're not going to do a post, we're going to do a put operation. If there is not, then we're going to do a post operation instead of a put operation. Because in the case of this Ansible module right here, we want the state of present, we want this state, where we want this site to exist. If it was set to absent, then we'd probably be looking at the delete function. Okay, so here we make the API call, we get that list of sites, and then we store the response, specifically the object of JSON within that response object. We store that to a variable called sites. Now, the next step for me, this is just kind of a little health check. We want to make sure that the API had presented us the sites in the format of a list. So what you see happening right here between 214 and 217 is we're just validating that the data that we got back from the API is in the format of a list, because we're about to loop over it. So if it's not a list, then we know that we're in a bad situation. We need to probably as it says here, we will actually fail the module. We will tell the user, hey, didn't get a list back. Something's wrong with the API. Contact your support. Okay, so now we got this object. It's a list of all of our sites. Again, that includes like the name as well as the ID and other parameters about the sites. So what we need to do here, Ampersand, I'm gonna put you down. Okay, Harley, you okay? Come here, Harley. Okay. Dog rotation. All right. So what we're gonna do next is we need to look to see whether or not the site has existed. All we've done so far is just collect the names or collect all the sites in the format of a list. Now what we're going to do is we're going to loop over that list and we're going to see whether or not the site that we're trying to create already exists. So what we do is, what I've done is I've created a blank dictionary called site. And then I've set a couple key value pairs within that object. One of them is something called provisioned, and I go ahead and I set it to false. So that's a Boolean. And then I also set another parameter of ID. I set that to a null value. In the way of Python, we say none. Okay, so I've got this empty object. What do I do with it? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to loop over this list of sites that we got from the API, and we're going to look into each one of them. And we're going to say, is the name object inside of this, is it equal to the name that we passed within the Ansible module? So this equals name, we declared that way back up here, right? So whatever the user had passed, in this case it's Katie, all underscore, we're gonna say, is this ever found inside of the list of the sites that you already have? Let's set you down, Harley. You're okay, Benny. If it is, then go ahead and flip the provisioned from false to true and set the site ID, ampersand, I just don't want you on my left. Get down, buddy, get down. Set the site ID equal to the site ID found within that instance. And so what we expect after we loop over this, right, at this line right here, the Python script, or this specifically this dictionary, will declare whether or not this site is found within the system. So now that we know that, let's take a peek and look into how we handle our next steps. So if the module state was set to absent, like if the user had typed in here absent instead of present, we know that the user wants to make sure that the site does not exist inside of the Mist API. So what we'll do is we'll say if the module parameters is set to absent, then we look into this object that we created right up here. We say, is the site provisioned? Is it set to true? Was there any time that there was a match? If it was set to true, then what we need to do is we're going to reach out, we're going to make we're invoking that REST object that we called. This is the REST API call. We're going to be running the delete method, and then we're going to point to the URL of /sites/ and we're going to point to the site ID, which we declared right here. So this will actually be like I don't know, I think it's like 32, a string of like 32 integers or 32 characters. How about that? Since the API is expecting it to be in this format of an ID rather by name, because you can have duplicate site names, you need to specify the ID. So we're basically telling Mist here, now we're finally deleting this site, and then we will exit the module. We'll tell the module to perform a graceful exit. We changed something here, and then here's the response.json. So this is only ran, we only run the delete method from the API if site was ever found inside of this list up here. Now, if we're wanting to delete a site, but it was not found to be true, like the site never existed, then we gracefully exit out of the module. We say changed equals false, which by the way changes the color that you get whenever you run the Ansible module, whether it'll be like green, yellow, blue, red, etc. That's all determined from this right here. And then we provide a message back to the user. We'll say site does not exist, we're exiting. Okay, that's if we're wanting to delete a site. Now, I hope that part makes sense, because what we're going to do now is a little bit more complicated. If the user had not set the state to absent, meaning that they wanted it to be present, in this case that's our instance here, then we need to go through some additional logic here. So let's kind of break this out here. If the site provisioned is false, meaning that when we looped over the list of sites that already exist, we never found this site available. So that obviously that will declare the HTTP method that we use. It will now be a post because we're trying to create something rather than a put where we would be updating something. So let's step into that logic just a little bit. So if site equals, or site provision equals false, meaning that we need to create it, then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new object called site underscore data. Now, here's the big reason why I wanted to do this. When you go into this Ansible module, you see some of the parameters that got passed inside of here. You have your name, address, country code, lat long, notes, site groups, and state. In addition to this, there's the organization ID and the API token. Those are mandatory for the Ansible module, but if you remember back in the script, I enable you to use a local environmental or a local variable on your host machine instead of declaring that right up in here. The reason why I point all that out is that if I just took in all the parameters of the module, the API token and the organization ID are going to be included inside of this. And I don't want that data included in my HTTP post to the system. There's a potential where your API key would actually get stored as a variable for the site, and that would be a huge security vulnerability. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking into all the module parameters that were declared up in here, excuse me, and I'm setting it inside of a dictionary called site data. I'm explicitly excluding API token and organization ID. That's my whole goal here. And so once we have that object, then we can make a post to the REST API, and we can say, I want you to create a new site, and here's all the site data. This is essentially all the data that was passed into here, minus the API token, minus the organization ID, because I don't want that to be included into it. And then we store the response right here. And then we also, kind of interesting, we create a site ID. So site was declared all the way back up here, if you remember. Site ID was originally set to null. And what we're saying here is site ID was never a match because we didn't have it. Right now we're setting that value, right? So with whatever site ID that's associated to this new site that we just created, we're going to go ahead and update that null object to reference site ID based on the HTTP post. All right, so just a really, pat myself on the back, really clever way of getting the information about the newly created site, getting the ID of it because we can reference it in the future. So we just created a new site within Mist. So bang up job. Now, let's see what else we're doing here. Create a few more objects. Okay, so that's right. So site groups. It's not enough to just create a site. There's the potential that the site is going to be associated to a group of sites. So what we're going to do is kind of similar to what we just had shown, where we create a new dictionary. It's just an empty dictionary. This time I'm calling it payload. Nothing is in here. This, by the way, is the same exact as doing this. So if you're more familiar, more comfortable creating an empty dictionary like that, then go ahead and do it. In my instance, I just like to do this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to find out whether or not this site that we just created is associated to a group of sites. Because when a site is associated to a group of sites, it inherits all of those common parameters shared amongst them. So we want to be able to enable the user to declare, hey, I'm creating a new site and associate it with this group of sites. Now let's go back to our Ansible module to see whether or not we did that. It looks like we did. Okay, so we're creating a site. Its name is Katie. Got some basic information, address, country code, lat long, notes. This is the killer. This is the secret one right here that we've got to focus on. We're saying site groups is equal to retail. Now, what is it about this object that's unique? Well, the first thing is that this is a list, right? A site can be a part of multiple groups. So we're accounting for that. So if we looked back into our argument spec for the Mist site, let's look at that. Mist site argument spec, and if I looked at site groups, the thing that separates it from the others is that this is in the type of a list. Again, super duper important that you tell Ansible how to handle the data that your users are passing. It won't always be a string. Sometimes it will be a Boolean, sometimes it will be an integer. In this case, we're telling it site groups is a list. Okay? So we've got this list here. So it's just one object in the list, but it's still a list nonetheless. Now we're saying, okay, now let's figure out how to associate this newly created site to a site group. This is challenging because we're working with human readable names. Again, Katie and retail. But what Mist knows on the back end is all the unique IDs, right? So this Mist doesn't recognize the site as Katie. It recognizes as a string of like 32 different characters. Same goes for retail. So what we need to do is we need to determine first, is this site going to be associated to a group of sites? If it is, what are those unique IDs of those group sites? And then how do we talk to the API to make sure that this site gets associated with them? So we need to do another set of lookups to get that information. So that's what we're about to do here. But first, got to get our data all structured in the format that we want it to be. Okay, so I'm right off the bat, I'm creating an object called site groups, and I'm setting it to false. So this is a Boolean. Do not confuse this object with the module parameter. They're completely separate. So I'm creating a site groups. I'm just going to go ahead and set it to false. Then I'm creating a blank dictionary called payload here. And then I look into the Ansible module parameters that were passed, and I'm storing all of them, including like API token and org ID. I'm including all of those parameters into a new object that we just call parameters. All right, and that is structured as a list. So this items comes back as a list. So what we'll do now is we'll loop over that list. We're basically looping over all the parameters that were passed through the Ansible module. So all of these, it can be as many as needed. And sometimes in this case, there might not be many module parameters, but just imagine if you're working with the WLAN module and you've got like hundreds of parameters. It gets really, you don't want to statically code this in, so you want to loop over it. So this is kind of an interesting take on it. What we're doing is we're looking into all the parameters that we passed, and we said for the key and value for every object in that list, we're saying if the value is not none, meaning somebody had typed in something for that parameter, then we know that we want that data stored into our payload object. But look at how I did this. And I don't really like this. I've done this in many different ways. In this case, I'm saying if the key is not equal to API token, org ID, or site groups, if the key is not set to that, then we're going to go ahead and append the key and the value to this empty dictionary. Basically, at the end of the day, what you end up with is an object called payload, and it's going to have the key and the value of the parameters that were passed within this module. And that's kind of how we're doing it. So again, this is like the second different way that I've shown how to do this. I think there's a third way that I've gotten here as well. I don't really like this because it gets pretty laborious. For one, for the person to code, and two, for the person to read and figure out what's going on here. But basically, again, we're looping over all the parameters. If there's data put into the value, then we know that the user had put something in there. We want to focus on that data. And then we try to filter out, was the key API token, was it org ID, or was it site groups? If it was, carry on. If it was not, then we know that that's a piece of data that we want included into our payload. So we'll go ahead and append, we'll update our empty dictionary to include those key value pairs. Nasty, right? Now, if the key was set to site groups, here you can see us excluding it, but in this case, if the key was set to site groups, meaning somebody had put something in here, then we want to go ahead and flip this object that we had previously created and set to false. We want to go ahead and set it to true. Thank you, love. Okay. All right. So if somebody had passed in that they want the site groups, then we know, then this is where we go into that rabbit hole of, let's go ahead and make a site lookup. But let's go ahead and show you if they did not. If they had never set something within the site groups, then this will never get set to true, which will then put you in this line, meaning we will just exit out of the module, and then we'll share that information to the user. Actually, this should probably just be empty. But again, if the site was just created, but it doesn't need to be associated to a group of sites, then let's just go ahead and exit out. But if the site groups was declared, then we know that we need to do another set of API lookups to kind of translate what the user had typed in there, in addition to translate that to the unique ID of that site group. Okay, so if site groups is set to true, ampersand, just lay down, dude. Lay down. Relax, man. I'm missing a dog. Aisha, have you seen Lemmy? I only have 4 dogs. Please stand by. I'm gonna go find my other dog. I'll be right back. Thanks for the heart attack, Lemmy. Yeah. Okay, dog was just in the other room. Hey, Joe, lay down, bud. Lay down. Okay. Where are we? So we want to declare. Here we go. Come here, Lemmy. Hey, buddy. All right, Lemmy. Here's our objective. All right. What we need to do. We know that we need to include this into a site group. So let's go ahead and grab a list of the site groups that already exist. And again, we want to grab both the name of those site groups as well as the ID, because that ID is what's really important for us. So I'm going to create an empty list this time. Previously we created empty dictionaries, and then we looped through things, and then we appended or updated to the dictionary. This time, since the data object that we're working with is a list, I'm going to create an empty list here, and this will just eventually hold the site IDs. We'll get to that in just in a second. Now I'm setting a new object called params, and I'm setting it equal to whatever the user had typed into for site groups. If we look into here, I can see site groups. Okay, this is a list object, and I've got one object inside of this list. It's called retail. All right, Daryl, shh. Calm down, guys, calm down. Nothing's happening. The sun is still an hour and a half away. Why are you guys getting all hype? All right, so here we're gonna go ahead and make the HTTP method for get, where we're gonna get a list of the site groups that currently exist. Here's the API endpoint for that right here. And then I will store that data as an object called provisioned. So basically I'm getting back a list of all the site groups that are already found within the system. Now I'm going to loop over all those site groups that were declared back in our module, which in this case it's just one, but I'm going to loop over this object called site groups. Here, remember, we set it to params. Probably should have called it something better. We're looping over all those site groups here, and we're saying for current and provisioned.json. So this is provisioned, and we're basically, again, we're looping over the currently provisioned site, and we're saying if each, meaning the site, is equal to the current name. So again, Daryl, please be quiet. What we're trying to do is we're trying to match what the username, what the human readable name that the user had entered here. We're trying to match that with a list or one of the site groups that was returned from the API. Trying to make a match. If this does exist, then what we say here, go ahead and append to this empty list that ID, right? Again, the whole goal of what we're trying to accomplish here is to get the unique ID translated from the human readable name, and then we store that in the object of ID list. Okay, now finally got everything that we need. We're going to go ahead and create another empty dictionary called payload, and I'm going to insert into that the site groups IDs and make it equal to the list that we had just retrieved. That list will have all the unique IDs for that specific site group. And then we tell it, okay, so a really important fact, we're calling site ID. Remember, this was either declared all the way up here if the site was provisioned. Then we store the ID as an object called site ID. But if it wasn't, then during the creation of the site, during the creation of the site, we updated that object with whatever Mist had created. So if we created the site during the module's execution, then we stored that response into a new object called site ID, and now we're pointing to that site ID within the REST API call. It's within the URL or the URI, and then we're passing in the payload. The payload is just going to say, here's the site IDs that you're supposed to be associated with. Oof. It doesn't really, and that's the interesting thing about programming. Like networking it's a little bit easier to talk through, I guess. The programming, there's a lot of logic, and I mean it's basically all logic. A little bit difficult to kind of get your head into what you were creating at the time. So if that didn't come off too well, or the explanation didn't really resonate, again, I'll do better next time. So let's go ahead and try to execute this. So the one thing that I need to do is I need to go ahead and install these Ansible modules. Now there's a few ways that you're you're going to do this in a non-development environment. What you would do is you would type in Ansible Galaxy, and I think collections install. Is that right? Ansible Galaxy install. Let's see, collection, and I'm gonna type in my name and say /mist. Invalid argument type, invalid choice, install, choose from Galaxy, choose from collection, role. Okay. Let's try it this way. Must be in the format of namespace. I thought that's, let's see. Let's actually go to the docs to see where this is. Ansible Galaxy Mist. No, that's not right. That's not me. There I am. Okay. And Ansible Galaxy collection install. Oh, crimsberg.mist. So not slash. Okay. There we go. That's going to go ahead and install all these modules, including that API helper thing that we had talked about. And so from here, let's go ahead and clear our screen. We are working within the Ansible virtual environment, and I am in the main branch of my source code repository. Now, for me to execute this, let's first look at my playbook. Oh, it's right here on the screen. This will create a site named Katie. It'll associate it to any site groups named retail. Let's just go into our Mist portal right now to see whether or not this exists. Oops. manage.mist.com. I'll need to sign in on the other window so you guys can't see. I know you're all just fiending for my username and password. So I'm going to try to keep you guys at one arm's distance here. Say for Mist, please. There we go. Copy that. All right, and just log in with my email. All right, excellent. So I'm logged into my Mist portal. Let's look at my organization. Looks like I've got, how many sites? I've got 2 sites. Let's go ahead and delete this site named Katie with a capital K. Get rid of you. You're gone. So I just have one site here. The site's name is Jackson. At Jackson's site, we've got one firewall. So this is SRX 320. I can see the health of the ports. I can even get some insights into applications being used within this site. We also have a couple switches. This one looks to be like a virtual chassis. Yep, so this is a stacked virtual chassis switch, and I can see all the configuration parameters, etc. Let's go ahead and bump this up just a little bit. There we go. And I've got another switch over here with a few access points connected to it. So really cool. I'm not going to be affecting this. We're going to be creating a new site named Katie here. So one thing that I need to do is I need to grab my organization ID and store it as a environmental into my Linux environment. So let's go ahead and do that. This is my organization ID. And let's edit my zish file. Okay, and at the very bottom, this is a file that will load every single time my terminal is loaded. So what I like to do is go ahead and create some environmentals right here. Let's go say Calvin's fun stuff. All right, and we'll type in the word export. I think it's Mist org ID equals that. Okay, and let me just make sure that Mist org ID is what we're expecting this to be. Do I need spaces in here? I don't think that's right. Let's see, export, no spaces. Okay, and we'll just go ahead and wrap this in quotes just in case. Just want to make sure that no one forgets that that this is supposed to be a string. Mist API token equals, and I'll just go ahead and leave it like that, and I'll update this off screen. Okay, and hit enter, and please stand by as I go and grab my Mist API key. Now, if you aren't familiar with how to do this, you can go to api.mist.com. Is that right? Shoot. It's like it's all over my scripts. Mist API manage. There we go. There we go. Let's go here. Docs and self. All right. So what we need to do is, let me see here, create a, is it /tokens? No. Where is the, it was in the documentation too. Mist API token create, what's the actual URL for that? Here it is, API tokens, not tokens. All right, so what I'll do, you can't see, you get like a concatenated version of this, but what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll change this, I'm sorry, just click this post button. When I click that, it's going to create me a new API token. Let's just do that off the screen so that you can't see it. Copy that, and then I'm going to go back into my text editor here, and I'm going to save this value. There we go. All right, so where are you at, buddy? There we go. Okay, now that I've created that, what I need to do is I need to load that file that we just edited, which is our profile. Once I did that, now those environmentals that we had set within that profile file are now available to us, and I can validate that by echoing out Mist org ID, and we get that string. If I did the same thing for Mist API token, I would get that coming back. And that, again, in case you forgot, is going to be super helpful for us, because in the argument spec, which you see us do here, is say if you don't pass the API token, it'll fall back to using any of these that are found on your system. Same is true for the organization ID. So because we've created those in our environment, now we don't have to pass them within our module, and so we should be good to go. Let me close this out, close that. Okay, so again, here's the sites that we have. Just one site named Jackson. Looks like it's associated to the site group called retail, so that's great. Site groups retail, it's already in there. So let's go ahead and run our Ansible module, Ansible playbook, and it's in the Remsburg Mist tests Mist site .yaml. All right. Okay, so first thing, we are successful. Second thing, we got a couple warnings. One was that there was no inventory parsed, and that's true. I don't have an inventory file. I don't feel like I need one, because we're interfacing with the REST API from Mist. There's no real concept of an inventory necessary. So much different than if you're coming from like the network or server administration, where you would need like host name and devices, IP, and all those things mapped out. Nope, in this case, we're just talking to the Mist API for 100% of our work. So I'm actually setting the host to localhost just so Ansible doesn't flip out. But it is still letting me know, hey, you didn't pass an inventory file that may or may not be an issue. In our case, it's not. So that's what the warning is. We can just safely ignore that. Okay, now you see task gathering. We should probably set fact gathering set to false so that it doesn't do that. But here's the actual work. Create a site. Yep, this is the name of the task. We're creating a site. Now we're importing that module of Mist site that you saw us install from Ansible Galaxy. We're passing these parameters, blah, blah, blah. Let's come back up to here. Now let me refresh my page. And wonderful. We now have a new site created called Katie. It has association to the right site group. We can see there's some notes called this is a test. And we can see the lat longe. We can see the street address, site groups that's associated with. Again, remember that in this specific instance here, we wanted this to be associated to a group of sites or a site group, but we only knew, or at least from the module, we only passed in the name of the group. We had to do all those additional API lookups to translate whether or not the site ID to a site name and the site group ID to a name. Let's go ahead and now let's run this module again. So from here, Ansible playbook, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. There we go. Let's run this again. Now, what should be the expected result? Because the site already exists inside of Mist. Unfortunately, it told us that the changed was equal to true, but that's because I didn't do a good job inside of my module to kind of safely back out of this. So if site provisioned, oh, actually I didn't even account for this situation. If site provisioned equals true, meaning that that is completely ignored, site groups equals false. So this is where we fell in. What we should do is we should create an additional step of logic to say, hey, if you're trying to create a site and the site already exists, then just kind of back out, or do a put operation and update those parameters as you see fit. So there's still some work that needs to be done here. Let's go ahead and change the state to absent and run the same module. Again, absent will make sure that the site does not exist inside of Mist. So we'll run our playbook again. Now we're going to do a delete function. We see that there was something that was changed. If I come back over to here, go to site configuration and refresh my page, the site Katie has magically disappeared off the face of the earth. And if I run this one again, the idea is that this item potency that I've tried to create in here, yeah. So nothing changed. Because the site already existed, nothing to report here. These aren't the droids that you're looking for. Go ahead and safely exit out. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the Mist Ansible modules that I've created. Again, I've got 4 modules right now that are kind of wrapped up inside of this collection, abstraction, I guess we'll call it, available inside of Ansible Galaxy. I've tried like hell to be good about my documentation. So pretty much everything that we've talked about inside of this video is available either through the documentation. Here's the basic documentation of the collection. There is additional documentation for all the modules. That also includes example playbooks like the one that you see here. That also includes the data model as well. So in case you're wondering what parameters are available for you, they are all here. So I hope this has been beneficial for you. Thank you for waking up so early just to hang out with us. Yeah, kind of an advanced topic, I guess. If you're just looking for an introduction to Ansible, this was not a good session for you. But if you've ever wanted to know how to build a Ansible collection or some modules for Ansible, and you know the key components like, hey, I'm going to be doing netconf or I'm going to be doing REST, how am I going to interface with these devices. Hopefully that this session has been helpful for you. With that, I'm just going to go ahead and retire and get ready for my work day. Again, 2 hours here. Thanks for hanging out the whole time. We'll be back probably later on in the week with something else. Who knows what will be covered. But thanks again, everybody.